This is the story of London in the 17th century, illuminated through two remarkable surveys. The first was a labour of love, put together by a London chronicler, who created a detailed description of London's character. The second, put together 100 years later, updated this original work. The changes documented in these two surveys reveal the phenomenal city London was to become. The first was the work of John Stow, a city merchant and chronicler, whose work was published in the very late 16th century. Arranged as a perambulation around London, the narrative proceeds chronologically within a topographical frame based on the actual layout of the city, along with chapters devoted to the antiquity of London and its walls, waters, gates, towers, schools, and customs. Stow had walked every street, explored all of the great buildings, and created a detailed account of a medieval city on the brink of change. Stow's London, still mostly contained within the London Wall, was home to just over 200,000 people. The second was an updating of Stow's, and was put together by John Strype in 1720. Strype was a clergyman and historian. Between Stow and Strype, London had seen a calamitous century. Sectarianism, civil war, the Great Plague, and of course the Great Fire. London should have been finished, but instead it arose like a phoenix from the ashes. Now, if we start with the Great Plague of London, which started in 1664, we know that it was an outbreak that struck London and was particularly violent during the hot months of August and September of 1665. The total number of deaths was about 70,000. People had no idea what caused the disease or how to control its rapid course. However, though the Black Death may have brought the city to its knees, London managed to climb back up again.
It's caused by a bacterium, which is called Yersinia pestis. The bacterium evolved actually from a harmless, non-pathogenic bacterium that normally lives in the soil. But the pathogenic Yersinia pestis is spread by fleas, which in turn are spread by rats.
Just as it seemed things couldn't get any worse, disaster ravaged London again. This time it was not pestilence, but fire. Fires were not unusual in London. Most houses and trades had open hearths, from brewers and soap boilers to blacksmiths. So when a fire started on Sunday morning in September 1666 in the King's Baker's house in Pudding Lane, no one took much notice. The Lord Mayor at the time remarked that when he first saw the fire, he thought it small enough for a woman to put it out. But a Strype later remarked,
"An easterly wind, which is the driest of all others, had blown for several days together before, and at that time very strongly."
So the wind not only spread the fire, but fanned the flames, as it were. So the unusually hot summer wind had turned London into a tinderbox, and a fire which could have been put out with a chamber pot spread across London. For the second time in as many years, after having reported on the plague, the diarist Samuel Pepys found himself reporting on a London tragedy. Now, as Pepys rushed along here, Watling Street, he saw the chaos for himself. He wrote, "Here and there, sick people being carried away in beds. People were saving themselves and their possessions, not fighting the fire." Some of Pepys's other comments included the following:
"Everybody endeavouring to remove their goods. Poor people staying in their houses as long as till the very fire touched them. and then running into boats or clambering from one pair of stairs by the waterside to another.
Houses were not just burning, they were burning at an alarming rate, and the streets of London were filled with people panicking and running for their lives. Now Londoners were in disarray. Not knowing what to do, they headed for the fields of Finsbury, Highgate, Islington, and to the boats of the Thames. Now one must remember that buildings were built close together. The wharves, which had done so much to spread London's economy, now spread the fire. Warehouses were packed with combustible materials: sugar, tar, rope, oil. So, the flames sped along the riverfront. The streets of London were filled with people running in horror, worry, distress, and anxiety. As they did so, the fire continued to spread. The clouds were full of smoke, the streets full of debris and ash. All across the city, London's developing trading centres were being laid to waste, and even the Royal Exchange behind me was engulfed in flames. As the day progressed, the fire continued to rage. Now Pepys walked through the smoky streets of London, littered with debris. Eventually, he found himself here, outside St. Paul's Cathedral. Now this was a cathedral which, just 5 days earlier, was one of the most venerable churches in all of Christendom. Now, it was a vast ruin. This is what Pepys wrote at the time. A miserable sight, the roofs and choir fallen. The fire finally came to an end, but with over 13,000 houses destroyed, much of the London Stow knew had gone. Almost immediately after the fire stopped burning, people started rebuilding. Despite the fire and a century of turmoil, London grew from a small medieval city into a vast, sprawling, wealthy metropolis. Indeed, one of the greatest trading cities in the world. The city that Stow had personally recorded, street by street, had grown far beyond the capacity for one man to document on foot. Now, if you had to find a catalyst for the astonishing evolution of London, where else would you find it but here, on the shores of one of the most famous rivers in the world? Stow and Strype, when they describe the Thames, offer clues as to why London survived and thrived. Stow, on his journey through London, described the Thames in a very particular way. This river openeth indifferently upon France and Flanders, our mightiest neighbours, and the city standeth thereon in such convenient distance from the sea, sufficiently removed from the fear of any sudden dangers that might be offered by them. Stow's description of the Thames reflects the concerns of his age. For centuries, England had been involved in European wars, so for Stow, the Thames was largely defensive. It offered splendid open vistas so Londoners could see enemies approaching. For Strype, the Thames meant something different. As he wrote, its great trade may be guessed at by the shipping laying at anchor in the River Thames. The masts resemble a forest, beside those constantly going out or coming from foreign parts of the known world. Strype didn't see the Thames as a barrier to invasion. He saw it as the lifeblood of the city, a port that welcomed goods and people from all over the world. Clearly, just by looking at this single aspect of the city, we see that not only did its function change over the course of a century, but it was also perceived differently. The same was true for other parts of the city. By By walking in the footsteps of Stow and Strype and comparing their surveys, we can investigate how London transformed during this remarkable century. Focusing closely on these two historical depictions of the city.